Sunday brought fire to the pulpit. The church was packed, as it always was after a death. Perdition Gulch didn't have much in the way of salvation, but it had Reverend Roland Falk, and Falk knew how to make damnation sound like a promise. He stood tall behind the altar, black coat dusted with road grit, Bible in one hand, and the other raised like he could strike down the devil himself. His voice rolled through the rafters, rich and scorching. "Repent, you children of Cain, for the reckoning is not some far-flung ghost. It walks among you now. You feed it with your sin. You stoke it with your fornication, your drink, your lawless appetites. Perdition is named well, and the fire that waits beyond this life has tasted the rot of your souls." Amens and mutters rippled through the pews. Some folks bowed heads. Others watched the floor. Me, I sat near the back, hat in hand, coat dusty from the trail, trying not to think about the empty chair beside me. Granger shifted beside, boots too loud against the wood. He smelled like sweat and saddle oil. Didn't much like being indoors. "Why are we here again?" he muttered. I didn't answer. Reputation, mostly. A lawman had to be seen honoring the cloth, no matter the shape of the man wearing it. And Falk, well, he wasn't a man you crossed lightly. Not in this town. His particular brand of hellfire had a way of catching. Outside the stained glass, the sun scorched the rooftops of Perdition, but inside, the air felt colder. The kind of cold that doesn't come from shade or stone. Kind that creeps along the spine and settles behind the eyes. Falk's sermons did that to a man. Left you raw. Left you wondering if maybe the devil didn't already own the deed to your soul. Falk's eyes swept the room, dark and gleaming, like tar in the firelight. When they found mine, it wasn't by accident. He held me there for a moment, his lips curling just enough to show teeth. Not a smile, something meaner, something satisfied. He shifted to a story from Judges, something about fire and vengeance, the punishment of wayward tribes. He made it sound current, made it local. "Your sins invite the scourge," he thundered. "Your pride builds the pyre, and when the flame descends, do not say the Lord was silent." People flinched at that. Some clutched at rosaries. Others looked towards the exit. I just watched, felt the heat from his voice and the chill in my gut, and I watched. Then came the closing hymn, sung half-hearted by voices too worn to rise. As the last note fell, Falk closed the Bible with a snap like a gallows gate. He descended the pulpit slowly, each step deliberate, boot heels like hammers on the plank floor. He moved down the aisle, offering blessings and hand clasps, most accepted with bowed heads and trembling fingers. Some looked too ashamed to meet his eyes. When he reached Beatrice Clem, seated alone near the front, he paused, said nothing, just laid a hand on the edge of her pew, a brief touch like marking territory. She looked up and met his gaze. No words passed, but her face changed, like just a flicker, like something remembered. Then he moved on. Granger and I rose and made our way to the side aisle. As we passed through the doors, I turned just enough to see Falk watching. Not the congregation, not the altar, just Beatrice. Eyes on her. Outside, the heat hit like a slap. I took a long breath of dust, the stink of the horses, and the iron tang of old sin. The sermon clung like smoke. "I reckon he was talking about Josiah?" Granger asked. I didn't answer. We mounted up, rode back towards the office in silence. The town moved slow round us. Wagons creaked, children ran, the blacksmith hammered rhythm into the bones of the day. But under it all, something else moved, low and patient, like thunder behind the hills, like a name waiting to be spoken. By dusk, Josiah's body would be found behind the saloon, and Perdition's real sermon would begin. Chapter 1. They found Josiah Clem, sprawled behind the broken spur saloon just as the sun began to tip west, the sky turning the same sick red as the smear that soaked the dirt beneath him. Arms twisted like he died mid-crawl, mouth open in a soundless scream. His shirt was torn open, chest flayed from collarbone to belly, like bark from a tree. Deputy Granger had gotten there first, paler than a sheet and dry heaving by the time I arrived. I took one look and knew this wasn't bar fight ugly. This was something older, hungrier, meaner. Josiah was no stranger to the inside of a cell. Drunk most days, cruel when he wasn't, mean to animals, worse to people. I'd strung him up once or twice for beating a mule, and once for beating his wife. But even a man like him didn't deserve to be carved up like livestock, not with his eyes gone, not with the frostbite ring on every edge of the wound, not with the air around him still holding the cold that shouldn't have been there. I knelt, studying him in the dirt. His fingers were curled around something, a glint of metal. I pried it loose, a ring, gold, cheap, but polished like it mattered. The initial K etched on the inside. It didn't fit the Josiah I knew. He was too proud to wear a family mark and too poor to afford it. Granger cleared his throat. Ain't no sign of a struggle, just Josiah's prints. Walked out of here on his own. No blood trail? He shook his head. Like he just laid down and died, boss. I stood, brushing dirt off my coat. My eye, the bad one, ached. The pale one, the one that sees things I wish it didn't. The alley felt wrong, in a way that went deeper than gore, like the ground remembered more than blood. Buzzards circled overhead, but none of them dared land. Even the flies kept their distance. We brought Josiah's body to Doc Kemper's, laid him out in the slab under the god-awful gaslight. The doc was an old army surgeon, mean and thorough. His hands didn't shake when he peeled back what was left of Josiah's shirt. Flesh is torn, but not cut. Something's raked him open. Something strong. He leaned in close and sniffed. Frozen, too. Not just cold. Freezer burned. I've seen that once before. Yukon trapper. Took 3 days to thaw. He looked at me, eyes flat. This man's been dead in less than a few hours, but tissue's gone stiff like he fell through ice. What about the eyes? Gone. Not plucked. Burned out. His mouth, look at the jawline. Teeth snapped from the inside, like he bit down on something that just wasn't there. Granger excused himself and lost his breakfast in the alley. I stayed, watched as Kemper uncovered more signs, bruises that didn't come from fists, a tongue half seared at the root, blood congealed in the veins, dark as oil. It wasn't just death that came from Josiah, it was judgment. I stepped out onto the porch, letting the wind cut through the stink. The sun had dipped low now. Shadows grew long. The alley behind the saloon was roped off, but folks still stood nearby, whispering. Across the street, Reverend Falk watched too, just standing, arms crossed, face unreadable. He nodded once, slow like a man who'd seen a promise fulfilled. Something cold moved through me then, and Granger joined me. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. There's a mark on the wall, I told him, behind where we found him. He looked at me sideways. What kind of mark? I lit a match and watched it burn low. kind that wasn't put there by any man. He said nothing more, and I pocketed the ring, the memory of it cold against my fingers. Night fell, and the wind carried ash. Chapter 2. Morning came slow and mean, the kind of morning that carried the scent of iron and smoke even though no fires burned. I sat in the jailhouse with a cup of coffee gone cold, listening to the wind curl around the eaves like it had a secret to tell. Word had spread by then. Josiah Clem's body was all anyone could talk about. Half the town believed it was mountain lions. The other half said demons. A few whispered of the war, how it still haunted men's dreams, how it might have never really ended. I didn't argue with any of them. Granger rode out before sunup to check for signs beyond the gulch. I gave him directions to the flats where the bones were rumored to lie. The boy had guts, but I didn't envy him the task. I'd seen what the desert could do to a man's courage, and what it preserved when it was done. I left, not long after, heading north past the edge of town, where the wind cuts sharper and the ground turns white with the collie. Perdition Gulch sits in the southern stretch of New Mexico territory, where the sun cooks you alive by noon and the dust chokes what little life the land allows. July here ain't meant for the cold. My bad eye ached, the way it always did when something unnatural stirred. It didn't show me visions, not always, just impressions, flashes, heat and cold where there should be none. The land there's mean and empty, a place where nothing grows but ghosts. I passed the carcass of a steer, ribs gnawed clean, hide draped over bone like a prayer flag. Coyotes hadn't touched it. Even the flies gave it a wide berth. I found the dry wash Tanner had told me about. He hadn't lied. The bones lay scattered like dice tossed by a bored god. At first glance, they looked animal. Too many ribs, too long in the limb, but the closer I looked, the less certain I became. The spine had been arranged, not by erosion or scavengers, but by hand or claws. Vertebrae laid out end to end, ribs fanned like wings. At the center was a skull, human, clean, eyes hollowed deep. Around it the soil was frozen. In perdition, in July. I crouched and pressed my palm to the ground. The cold burned. The tracks were there too, barefoot, deep. The stride too long, toes curled like talons. Not a man nor a beast, something that remembered how to be both. Something that didn't want to forget. I followed them until they vanished into the heart pan. No trail, no scent, just silence. The silence was the worst. Not quiet. Silence. No birds. No insects. Even the wind had gone still. The kind of hush that feels like breath held behind the sky. On the way back, I passed through Widow's Cut, an old gully with a dead tree split down the middle like a mouth. I stopped when I saw the vultures. They circled above a fresh cairn of stones, one no one in town had built. I dismounted, rifle at the ready, boots crunching dry grass. The cairn wasn't just a marker. It was an altar. Bones tucked between the stones, scorch marks, scraps of hide and cloth soaked in what I knew was blood before I touched it. Something had been offered here, and something had taken it. The air buzzed like copper in my teeth. My breath fogged despite the heat. A shadow passed over the sun, and for a heartbeat I thought I heard footsteps behind me. My head throbbed. The world tilted. A whisper came to me, not in my ears, but in the marrow. Feed me. I backed away, mounted up, and rode like hell with snapping at my heels. When I got back, Granger was waiting. He didn't speak at first, just handed me a scrap of paper. Found it near the wash, he said. The paper was scorched to the edges. Charcoal symbols scratched into it. Circles within circles. A tree of bone. The same symbol, the same antler-eyed symbol I'd seen behind Josiah's corpse. I didn't ask how he knew to give it to me. He just did. Back in the office, I lit the lamps early. The sun had gone down too fast. The wind had changed direction. The coffee was still cold, still bitter. Something was moving, not just through the town, through the world. And it knew I was watching. I knew the Clem place sat 2 miles west of town, where the land turns mean and flat. Nothing out there but buzzards, dust, and the bones of failed crops. The house stood like a bad memory, half collapsed and blackened by a fire 10 years past. Folks said Beatrice lived there still, but no one had seen her since the sermon days past. I rode out alone. The sun hung low behind haze, giving the sky a rusted sheen. The wind came in off the flats, sharp and steady, carrying with it the stink of something long dead. My horse, Banshee, shifted underneath me. She didn't like the feel of the place. Neither did I. The porch sagged under my weight, boards giving a long, tired groan, but it held. I knocked once, twice, then waited. No answer. Just the sound of the wind pushing against the cracked side. I pushed open the door. The inside smelt of burnt wood and mildew. Shadows clung to the corners like cobwebs. There was evidence of habitation. Blankets, an old kettle, a shelf of cracked glass jars. And on the far wall, covered with soot and symbols, was a mirror. Them symbols weren't random. I'd seen their kind before. Circles of protection, runes of binding. Not amateur work neither. Someone had studied. Someone had prayed. And in the corner, hunched over like a broken marionette, sat Beatrice. She didn't look at me. Her hair hung like a veil over her face. She held a scrap of parchment in one hand and something bone-white in the other. Her lips moved, whispering words too soft to catch. "Beatrice," I said. No answer. A step closer. The room felt colder here. Not breeze cold. Deep cold. The kind you find in caves or graves. The parchment was marked with the same symbols from Josiah's alley. The bone in her hand looked like a finger. Human. Clean. My breath fogged as I crossed the room. There were markings all around. Charcoal lines on the windows, a circle of ash on the floor. Dried herbs bundled above the doorway. Protective measures. Old ones. But whether they were meant to keep something out or in, I couldn't yet say. I crouched beside Beatrice, and she didn't flinch. Her skin looked thin, paper dry, like it might split if you touched her. Her eyes, when they lifted to mine, were red-rimmed and vacant. "Josiah's dead," I said, torn open like a deer. She blinked slowly. Her mouth moved, but no words came out at first. When she did speak, her voice was hoarse, as if dragged through gravel. "He was a wicked man," she said. "God has many ways to punish." My jaw tightened. "Did you do something, Beatrice? Did you bring something here?" She didn't answer, just stared at the bone in her hand, cradling it like a relic. A thread of dark hair clung to it, brittle and curling. I looked around again. The whole house was a shrine to loss. Family portraits scorched at the edges. A child's boots in the corner. Candles burned down in dumps. The mirror, cracked but upright, reflecting only shadow. "Been expecting company there, Beatrice?" I said. She still said nothing. But the mirror creaked, just slightly, as if something behind it shifted its weight. You opened the door, didn't you? Now you don't know how to close it. This time she looked at me, really looked, and in her eyes was something raw. Not madness, not guilt, something colder. Some doors don't close, she whispered. The mirror cracked then, top to bottom, a long, slow sound like a bone splitting. I stepped back, hand going to my revolver. The candle's flames sputtered, twisted sideways, but the glass held. I left her there. I knew she wasn't going anywhere. Not from that house. Not from that grief. Outside, the wind had changed again. Colder, more insistent. Buzzards were gone. The sun was bleeding into the horizon. Beatrice had opened a door, and something had walked through it. Chapter 4. The killings didn't stop. 2 nights after I visited Beatrice, old Elias Vane was found gutted in his barn. Same cold wounds, same absence of struggle, same unnatural frost smeared across the floorboards where the blood refused to thaw. 3 days later, a saloon girl named Dora May vanished. We found a shawl and her shoe in the alley, but not a trace of the girl herself. Just a splash of frozen earth and 3 long gouges clawed into a boulder like God's fingernails. The town began to unravel. Windows were nailed shut. Children kept indoors. Church attendance swelled like a boil. The reverend's sermons grew louder, harsher. Fire, damnation, and divine justice. He told folks this was what came from wickedness unpunished, from sins left festering. And the townsfolk, God help them, they listened, believed. Maybe if they repented, the Lord would save them. They needed someone to blame. The dead couldn't answer. Rumors swirled around Beatrice. Whispers followed her name through back alleys and under breath. Folks remembered the screaming matches, the bruises, the way she never flinched when Josiah bared his teeth. They remembered the fire that took her boy. By then, I'd scoured every inch of the land around Perdition. I followed tracks into ravines and up through mesquite-cloaked hills. I found symbols etched into trees, the bones of birds threaded with human hair, shrines left behind with offerings of fat and coin and teeth. The deeper I went, the more I felt the boundary fray, the line between this world and something else, something older, colder. One night, I came across a cabin near the creek bed, abandoned for years, but something had moved in. The door was splintered from the inside, and on the walls, symbols in dried blood. The hearth was piled with broken antlers, not shed, shattered. In the ash I found a footprint. Human. Bare, but not quite. The heel was elongated, the toes clawed. Whatever walked on it had weight and hunger both. I rode hard back to town that night, found Granger outside the jail, pistol drawn, eyes wide. Something was at the window, he told me. Didn't knock, just watched. That night I slept in the office, or tried to. At some point past midnight, the door creaked. I rose, revolver drawn, breath held. But it was just Falk. He entered without knocking, robe still dusty from the trail. His eyes gleamed like oiled iron. "We are being tested, Sheriff," he said. "Ah, is that what you call it?" He stepped closer. "The Lord's wrath comes in many forms. Sometimes he sends fire. Sometimes he sends famine. And sometimes..." He paused, looking toward the frost-rimmed window. "He sends a beast." "You think this is divine?" "I think we've strayed too far. I think the town is sick, and sickness must be purged." He left then, offering no more. But he'd said enough. One night I stopped at Doc Kemper's. He hadn't left his house in days. I found him in his study, half mad with fear, poring over anatomy text and old tribal lore. "It's taken pieces," he told me, eyes wild. "Not just flesh, tendons, organs, the parts that move, as if building something, or fixing what is." I asked him what he meant, and he just pointed to a journal full of sketches, spines too long, jaws unhinged, hands ending in talons. "So I think it learns," he whispered. "I think it remembers." I left him with a bottle and a prayer. That man didn't have much longer. That night, I dreamed of snow. Not the clean kind. This snow was black. It fell slow like ash. I stood alone on the streets of Perdition, and every building was burning. In the flames, I saw faces. Dora May, Burdock, even Josiah, all screaming, but not in pain, in hunger, in anger. And behind them all, tall and silent, stood the thing, watching me with hollowed eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat in my window, rimmed with frost. Something had passed through. Something was watching. Chapter 5. The nights grew longer, not by the clock, but by some deeper measure. Time stretched, slow, like it didn't want to move forward while the thing still walked. I spent those hours in my office, lantern burning low, poring over old books, burned journals, maps drawn in rust and madness, grimoires that shouldn't have ever seen the light of day. There's a trunk I keep locked beneath the floorboard. Inside are records the Pinkertons wouldn't claim, testimonies given in blood, things I swore never to look at again. But promises are for peace. This was war. I laid it all out. Stories older than the territories, creatures that walked in winter's breath. Some called them Ishta, some Chino, always the same. Hunger that wore a face, spirits with names long buried in the language of dying tribes, twisted by the tongues of white men and missionaries until all that remained was fear. One account from a missionary gone mad in Montana spoke of a creature with bones like icicles and eyes like ember. He wrote of a village devoured in a single night. His pages were smeared with soot and what I could only assume was blood. Another, a trapper in Saskatchewan, his partner torn to ribbons, surrounded by spirals in the snow. The trapper wrote one word over and over again: cold. But an Arapaho guide's words rang loudest. It comes when called by grief, feeds on sorrow, grows with revenge. Flesh is fuel, bone is memory. You cannot kill what remembers hunger. Wendigo. The name chilled something deep in me. Not the storybook monster whispered to frighten children, but a thing shaped by ritual, given form by hate. It wasn't just hunger. It was hunger weaponized, sharpened, used. Patterns emerged. Fire repelled it. Sacred ground confused it. Salt and ash could bind it, but not forever. It couldn't be slain, only banished, temporarily. Inevitably, it would crawl back if the summoner still breathed. And yet every text said the same. Its strength wasn't in its claws or fangs, but in the hatred that birthed it, that gave it form. At dawn, I rode out to see Laughing Crow, medicine man who lived north of the dry lake bed. He'd been there before the railroad, before the town, before any of us tried to carve names into land that wasn't ours. We had an understanding. He let me in without a word. His home smelled of cedar and something older, decay maybe, or memory. I told him what I'd seen, and he nodded. He brewed a tea that burned like copper and moss, and the smoke clung to my skin, and he watched as I drank, his eyes never blinking. Visions came, not dreams, but truths told sideways, fire in the snow, a tree of bone with children's skulls, a face I couldn't place. I woke, gasping. The tea had scalded my tongue, but left me colder than I'd ever felt. Laughing Crow didn't ask questions. He placed a pouch in my hand, and I opened it to look. Ash from betrayed bones, iron shavings, obsidian. Tools not of killing, but of delay. Mark a circle in all four winds, he told me. Speak your truths aloud. Do not lie. If it comes, and it will, make it know your name. Can it be killed? I asked. And he shook his head. You don't kill winter. You endure it. He led me outside and pointed to the sky. Clouds heavy with snow that would never fall. On the way back, I stopped by the abandoned mining camp outside Perdition, where the land rises into broken ridges. The buildings were empty, doorways gaping like mouths. No sign of habitation in years. But something had moved through recently. Snow didn't fall, but the earth was dusted in frost, and there were drag marks leading into the collapsed bunkhouse. Inside, I found a cairn. This one wasn't built by any miner's hands. Bones stacked in a spiral, burnt offerings placed at its base. Part of the ritual, perhaps. Part of that thing's tether, maybe. I left it untouched. That kind of magic bites back. I rode the long way back, cutting around the mesa where the wind howls like a widow. The land felt thinner out there, like a scab peeled back. Perdition looked small beneath the bruised sky, too fragile for what was coming. The thing had a name now, but so did I. Sheriff Elias Vane, soldier, sinner, sentinel. And I would face the beast before the tally came due. Chapter 6. The town's record hall was colder than it should have been. Dust lay thick on the ledgers like winter's warning, and my boots echoed too loud against the stone floor. I came looking for paper, but it was the silence that found me first. I started with census scrolls, mining ledgers, marriage filings, town council minutes, yellow and brittle, anything that might point to a pattern. What I found was a history of grief. Perdition wasn't built. It was survived. Every decade had its disaster. Flood, fire, blight, children buried in bunches, whole families swallowed by debt or drink. That wasn't just bad luck. It was as if the earth had soured underneath us, and every soul born here came up bitter. One name kept cropping up. Falk. Not just Reverend Roland, but others before him. So Falk had signed the town charter. Another had served as judge during the lynchings of 1863. And in a letter tucked inside a surveyor's logbook, I found mention of a Falk family crypt, long buried under what was now the church foundation. All the documents together told stories most men tried to forget. The original chapel had been built on top of scorched ground, following an unexplained blaze that wiped out a traveling caravan. No survivors, no records, just the word cleansed scribbled in the town report. I found an old burial registry where someone, handwriting shaky, had added 3 names in the margins, each of them stricken through. Elias Burdock, Dora May, Josiah Lorne. Below them, mine. Not yet crossed out. Back in my office, I stared at the list. I drank until the fire in my gut outpaced the cold crawling under my skin. The facts wouldn't settle. The names, the deaths, the patterns, all circling around like vultures in my head. Like something was feeding on it all. Sleep claimed me in the chair, and that's when the dream came. I was in the gulch, where the town took its name, but It wasn't the place I knew. This gulch was deeper, darker, stone walls slick with ice and air choked with ash. The creature stood at the far end, half shadow, half flesh, antlers arced like twisted iron, eyes hollow as gun barrels. It didn't move. It waited. Behind me I heard voices, names spoken in whispers. Josiah, Burdock, Dora May. My own. They came one by one, pale and naked, dragging their grief behind them like chains. The Wendigo opened its mouth, and they walked inside. Then another figure stepped forward, not pale, not dead, clothed in preacher's black. His face was wrong, shifting. His eyes glowed blue, like moonlight through glass. He held a book. It was Falk, but not Falk. He opened the book. The names were written inside. I reached for my gun, but I found only ash. I awoke, with frost in my breath and blood on my palm. A single word, carved into the skin like a brand. Soon. I knew this wasn't just a haunting. This was a harvest. The past was soil, and someone had been planting hatred in it for generations. That morning I visited Doc Kemper. He'd been poring over Josiah's remains for days in his backroom lab, a space that stank of formaldehyde and ink. He showed me the bones laid out on a long table, pale, brittle, and wrong. Something drained the marrow, he said, tapping a tibia with a glass rod. It took out what makes a man stand. I'd asked if he ever seen anything like it. He hesitated, then opened a locked drawer, pulled out a drawing done in charcoal. Part man, part beast, with long claws and hollowed eyes. My grandmother told stories, he said, back in Maine, of something that came in the snow and whispered your name. Another thread pulled tight. This beast that haunted Perdition, it had roots deeper than blood, and knew the scent of mine. Chapter 7. Perdition woke to a sky like lead, heavy and cracked with a low thunder that never seemed to roll. Folks moved slower, like the cold was in their bones, even though the air was still. No wind, no birdsong, just that quiet you get before a storm that ain't quite weather. I made the rounds. Burdock's place first. Snow, or what passed for it, had dusted the porch. The ground was too warm, yet the white crust clung like hoarfrost. His cattle were dead, eyes wide, ribs stretched under hides that hadn't been fed on grass in days. No wounds, no sign of struggle, just dead, like something had stolen the will out of him. Word spread quick. Miners refused to go. Below, Beatrice hadn't been seen in days. The reverend sermons grew shorter, more fevered, more fire than salvation. Folks clung to scripture and kerosene in equal measure. I didn't patrol anymore. I hunted. All beasts have a pattern, and I meant to break it. I rode at dusk, where the creature liked the world best, neither day nor night. And I found more signs. Trees twisted into unnatural arcs, bloodless animal carcasses posed like offerings. Spirals etched into riverbeds. Then came the scream. South Ridge, a cabin, Widow's Ansel. The door had been ripped off its hinges, one wall clawed open like paper. Blood trailed through the snowless dust, then stopped. No body. No more signs of a struggle. Just her glasses in the corner, lenses cracked. I followed the trail, winding through ravines until it vanished among black stones crusted with ice. The earth moaned beneath my boot. The stars dimmed overhead. Then I found something else. A boot, torn, spattered with blood. Deputy Raiders. I found him not far after, lashed to a tree with sinew, eyes rolled back, lips torn from screaming. Still alive, barely. His body trembled with cold, though no frost touched the air. Runes carved into the bark around him. I cut him loose. He couldn't speak, but I laid him across my horse and sent him back towards town with a whisper and a slap. If he made it, he might live. But I knew the beast had done that for a show. For me, I marked the winds, drew the circle, laid down salt and obsidian and ash, and I recited my name, my truth, my guilt. Each word felt like a toll, and I spoke them anyway. Over and over again I repeated it. Hours went by, night fell. It came just after the stars blinked out, tall as two men, skin stretched tight over bones that didn't fit. Its eyes weren't red, they were cold. The beast didn't roar, it whispered. Elias. It knew me. I raised my iron, and the winter man charged. Our clash wasn't fire and thunder. It was breath and silence, teeth and will. I fired once, the bullet burning bright with the herbs Lightning Crow gave me. It didn't drop, but I did stagger the beast, steam pouring from the wound. It circled, fast as thought, but I held that circle, chanting, remembering. I named every sin that I carried, every grave left unmarked. My voice cracked, blood on my lips. The winds howled with the screams of lost children. It lunged again, and I ducked beneath its talons and slashed at it with my knife. The blade hissed as it met flesh, slicing through the illusion of skin like fog. Black ichor spilled and sizzled on the salt. The creature vanished and reappeared behind me, talons raised, but I rolled clear, barely dodging the blow. It screamed, not in rage, but in memory, a sound like mourning. Every wound I inflicted slowed it down, not with pain, but with the weight of guilt. The salt and ash forced it to remember who it had been, who it had lost, what it had done. I whispered the name of a brother I watched die in the trenches, the name of a woman I failed to save on a railroad track in Kansas. Names that hurt, names the Wendigo seemed to recognize. It stumbled, form flickering, the shape of a man beneath the horror, but just for a second. Then, gone. I seized the moment, stepped into the circle, and stood tall. Sheriff Elias Vane, I shouted. Sentinel, soldier, you don't own this town. Not tonight. Not ever. The creature shrieked and tore at its own flesh, clawing its symbols unseen. The circle glowed, the wind roared, the ground cracked, and it was gone. I collapsed in the dirt, the ash of the beast on the wind. Dawn broke slow, the kind of gray light that makes the world look half dead. I rose from the circle on torn knees, throat dry as sand, coat stiff with blood and ash. My breath fogged, even though the air didn't hold bite as it should. The stillness lingered, like the world was catching its breath. The deputy was waiting at the edge of town, pale, bruised, beat to shreds, but standing. Someone had taken him in, Doc Kemper most likely. He gave me a nod that I returned. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Some things don't ask for words. Chapter 8. Perdition had quieted. The kind of quiet that ain't peace. More like the aftermath of something that didn't finish the job. Children still didn't play in the streets. No hammers rang from the smithy. The town moved, like it feared waking something still curled in the shadows. I made for the trough outside the saloon, stripped off my coat, and washed it in the cold water. Blood flaked away like rust, and I caught my own reflection. Eyes hollow, skin sallow, and something behind me I couldn't quite place. Not a figure, just a presence. Inside the saloon, talk stopped when I entered. Cards laid down, glasses lowered. I ordered a coffee, not whiskey. No one joined me, and that suited me fine. The church bell rang at noon. We all gathered. Falk's sermon spilled fire and fury from the pulpit. He thanked the Lord for delivering Perdition, said sin had been uprooted, named the beast a punishment, not a plague. His voice rang like judgment and still. No one shouted amen. I stood in the back, arms folded, watched. Beatrice, too, rose from the front, her hands clenched, eyes glazed over, distant. She didn't move when the sermon ended, just sat there like she was carved from salt. When I passed Falk at the doors, I offered a nod. He returned it, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That night, I returned to my office, retrieved the ring from its place beneath the floorboards, the one Josiah had worn. Ran my thumb over the inscription, "Whither thou goest." I placed it in a tin and buried it behind the gallows post. Then I opened the book I swore I'd never open again and wrote down their names: Burdock, Dora May, Josiah, Widow Ansel. The list grew as I thought of them, not just dead, forgotten. The town had a habit of swallowing memory. I looked over the book, and I left space, always more space. I walked the perimeter of Perdition before dawn, watched the stars blink in and out, thought I heard something in the wind, a voice I'd heard before. Mine, maybe, or his. Hard to say. When I returned, I stood by the church. I looked up at the cross. It leaned, ever so slightly, like it had been pushed. Something had been banished, yes, but not broken. Something else lingered. Older, quieter, waiting. The town was still standing, but I'd seen enough to know that that didn't mean safe. I lit the lantern in my office window, a signal that I was on watch. The name's Elias Vane, and I'm still watching.